Hi, and welcome to Frontline Conversations. I am Abhinav Chakraborty, and today we have Aatish Taseer with us. Aatish Taseer is a well known writer, journalist, and author of several books, including the acclaimed novels The Way Things Were and The Temple Goers, and the memoir Stranger to History A Son's Journey Through Islamic Lands. He has also translated a set of short stories by the noted Urdu writer Saadat Hasan Manto. Presently, he is a writer at large for T, the New York Times style magazine, and he lives in New York. Today, we'll be talking to Mr. Taseer about his new book, A Return to Self, Excursions in Exile, which is published by HarperCollins India under their imprint Fourth Estate. The book, by blending travelogue and memoir, looks closely at what it means to belong to a place that becomes a politicized vessel for ideas defined by exclusion and prejudice, and attempts to understand the migrations that define our multicultural world. Welcome to Frontline Conversations, Mr. Taseer.
Thank you.
First up, I would like to ask you, how did A Return to Self come together? When did you realize that these pieces, which you originally wrote for the New York Times after your overseas citizenship of India card, which is the OCI card, was revoked in 2019, could form a unified travel memoir that blends the political with the personal?
So I've never really doubted the kind of inner cohesion of the book. There are these concerns which I've actually come to in part through my collaboration with Hanya Yanagihara, who's my editor at the Times. But the books, the pieces all circle around the question of syncretism, of layered cultures, of historical tension, and of finding those little points in history that continue to resonate into the present. So even though the pieces, sometimes with a book like this, the writer will impose an external scaffolding, and in this case, I never felt that need. I felt that there was genuine connective tissue.
My next question was about your opening essay, in which at one point you discuss how India's urban elite, which has been infamously called the Khan Market Gang by someone no less than the Prime Minister himself. Right. So you've discussed how, India's urban elite have long believed themselves to be the custodians of this idea of India. And even as that idea weakened or eroded over time. And you've also touched upon the contempt that India's leaders today have for those principles. But should this elite also carry blame for allowing that erosion?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I very much felt, all my early work dealt with the precarity of that elite and that the kind of distance at which they lived in relation to the country at large. And they seemed like, there was a great an arrogance, a feeling that they were indestructible or unassailable. But all of those books, the Twice Born, the Twice Born, of course, as well, but the Temple Goers, The Way Things Were, are all concerned with the precarity of this class. And I think in different situations, I felt that I probably described them as people who were inviting a kind of destruction upon themselves.
In the same essay,
I should say also that, that you see probably some of that lack of energy in that elite represented with the opposition at the moment, because typically like a dynamic opposition, when it's defeated, it goes to ground 5-10 years, and then it throws forward new people, and that's the sign of a democracy that's working in the right ways. And you don't feel that in India. You feel like a kind of absurdity almost in the inability to respond to the moment, to respond to political decimation in creative new ways. And so I think Mr. Modi, for all his flaws, he definitely exposed weaknesses within the country that still remain.
In the same introductory essay, You move from describing how deeply you felt Indian to showing how you felt strangely free, in your own words, after India closed its doors to you, and how it even sparked your old curiosities. So, given that backdrop, when you see or witness stories like, Bengali Muslims being labeled Bangladeshis, or say the NRC debacle, which happened in Assam, that bureaucratic exercise a few years ago, do you feel a sense of relative privilege to where you stand, probably?
I mean, it's a very what use is my privilege here? I mean, you're right. I have a well-known father who's dead. I have a mother who's in her 70s in India, a country I can't go back to. Here, I live with my husband. We live by what we earn, and we have, like, in the grand scheme of American things, I don't feel particularly privileged. And so these different frames of privilege, it's very interesting if you change the frame. For instance, in America, you see many of the people who are very successful in business life here are upper caste. Now, like, did their privilege contribute to their sense of confidence? Did they feel that they were people of learning, people who were going to be, did they feel old in their bones? Did they feel like a sense of entitlement? I don't know. I mean, those are those ways in which, like, it's sort of like, if you have a currency in one country that can buy you certain things, and you try to convert it into another place, and you can, barely sort of buy yourself lunch. Like, I mean, it's sort of a, so I don't it, I don't want to sort of refute your question outright, because I think that these things do have a carryover, but at the same time, like, it's not always as tangible as you may think.
So I'll move on to your essay about Uzbekistan, which is called The Museum Cities, in which you trace a drive towards historical purity and how it's feeding a new wave of populism, as you called it, in different parts of the world, including India. Do you see ways to counter that? And do you think it is just a culture war issue, or does it bleed deeper into, say, even the political realm?
I would say it was the opposite, that it was cultural first and then political. Like, I think what we're seeing is a kind of nexus of cultural upheaval related to technology. And I think that it's bringing forward a political cataclysm that, like, we cannot look at as an isolated event. We cannot look at what is happening in Turkey as separate from what is happening in the United States, in great parts of Europe, in India. So we're clearly, like, dealing with something that is a kind of global shakeup of some sort. Uh, as for the question of a response, I don't know, where has the response really come? I think what we see are people trying to hold on to the status quo, but I haven't seen um, a profound or credible political response to the kind of upheaval that we've experienced. I see fear and desperation still, and we're kind of, like, sort of waiting to see how one turns a corner. I think I should say also that the illusion that the desire for status quo ante, which is something that exists in India in almost a ridiculous extent, but here too, there's this wish to kind of pretend like none of it has happened. I think that is it completely, that's there's a sort of madness to that response. You have to reckon with the fact that the world is not going to be as it was before.
I mean, you do touch upon that strand of thought in a different essay, and I will come to that. I do have a question about that as well. But first, I would like to then move on to your essay about Morocco, in which you write, and I quote, "Our time is the enemy of the past, and increasingly, I find the wonder of travel lies less in the discovery of new places than in tracing the outline of those that have ceased to exist." Could you unpack that strand of thought a bit more for us?
So one of the concerns of this book, which I think like it's part of the privilege of traveling with an Indian background, because we have so many outlines in India of historical unities that have ceased to exist, which have been overlaid by new political realities. And so an Indian almost automatically lives with these two or three or four senses of what their country might have been, almost configurations. And when I was traveling in this book, there's an effort to restore the outline of those former political unities, to kind of change the lens, as it were, so that you're in modern Spain, which is a country that is part of the European Union, but you can also be returned to the history of the Reconquista, and even more powerfully, probably returned to the idea of Muslim Spain. And I feel like that that sort of that relationship between how the world is configured is something that I'm very, very aware of. And I find it like one of the more provocative aspects of travel is to kind of encourage people to start to see one political reality as the overlay of what has gone before. And so I'm kind of like, it's almost a kind of journey into the sort of the ghostlands of former empires, of former political realities.
Spoke um, Spain, and my next question was about Andalusia. So, in that essay, you examine Islam's erasure from Andalusia, and you observe that once a majoritarian drive takes hold in a particular society, no concession will ever suffice. You also reference the Ayodhya temple on the site of a 16th century mosque. In light of the 2024 parliamentary election results, which followed the Ram Temple consecration, did you find any hope for the idea of India?
Do you know, I find the hope actually like on the ground in India. You know, I was traveling very extensively in 2019 before I couldn't go again. And every time you go to a small kasbah, whether it's in like UP or parts of the South, you see a great intermingling. You know, you see, in fact, sometimes much more than this country, which can still feel very racially segregated. In India, you don't feel that segregation. You feel uh, a great familiarity. You feel the sort of that line of meeting, of encounter, is still very strong. I think that the cities urbanity has a way of producing new kinds of segregation, but on the level of small towns and villages, I still feel India is extremely composite. And so maybe I derive hope from that, from the fact that really you have this ballast against against historical purity or against historical erasure, and maybe it needs a new formulation. Maybe it will find a new expression, because it really, in some ways, to destroy it would be to destroy the country.
You write of the purity of the lotus in Sri Lanka and India, and how pre colonial rediscovery has slipped into ethno-nationalism. So you were talking about the idea of reconciliation, the idea of reckoning. And, does the idea of reconciliation belong to decolonization? And has that got lost somewhere amidst everything that has happened?
I mean, I think that we had a like quite a naive idea of decolonization. I've recently been reading the Adam Schatz biography of Frantz Fanon, and you see that he has a certain naivete when it comes to decolonization as well, because there were many kind of neo-traditional, neo-conservative impulses that were coming to the surface as the colonists left. And I think that in Sri Lanka and in India, this drive for authenticity, this need to return to self, as it were, which is something that like comes up in the book, but it comes up in post-colonial discourse as well. well, that return to self like contains many elements that are super regressive, super violent, super majoritarian. And so I think that we're kind of like we're kind of living through it's almost as if that first layer of post-colonial history has peeled away, and now we're probably coming much closer to what our own histories, free of the hand of the colonists, are genuinely really contain.
This is my final question to you, sir, and which is you mentioned how the writer Jeet Thayil, once told you exile is the writer's natural state. So for you, Mr. Taseer, what remains of home? What is home for you?
It's very specific. It's not a mystical idea of home. It's literally my address, and that act of doing and making that is like part of home building in the United States. That's kind of what I have, and I don't know if like in some ways that's not a bad thing, because it's also the romance of home, which is so powerful in India, can also be it can contain dangers of its own. This is a very demystified idea of home, and but yet at the same time very concrete, very tangible. And on the larger scale, which I think was what Jeet was hinting at, like I don't know what it does to somebody, for an artist specifically, to be bereft of a homeland or a country. Like I don't know if it is an inspiring thing, if it's a creatively feeding thing, or if there is also like an element of sterility, an element of loss that is almost too great to surmount.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Mr. Taseer. It was a pleasure talking to you.
You're very welcome. It was lovely talking to you too.